All right, so have you heard about this whole 30-day challenge thing? Like, can you really master any skill in just 30 days? We're going to deep dive into a podcast that claims you can.
Yeah.
I was pretty skeptical at first, but let's see what they have to say and find out if it actually holds up,
Well, they start out by asking why 30 days. It's not just some random number they pulled out of thin air.
Right.
They actually bring up this research by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. He found that it took his patients an average of 21 days to adapt to a new change, like losing a limb or getting plastic surgery, pretty drastic stuff.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's where that whole 21-day myth comes from. But this podcast takes it a bit further to a full 30 days.
Yeah.
So is that backed up by, like, actual science, or is it just, a marketing tactic to sound catchy?
Well, they argue that those extra 9 days, they act as a buffer for those slip-ups. We all have them. Plus, a whole month just gives you more time for noticeable growth, which can be a huge motivation booster.
Yeah.
But they do make it clear that this isn't about becoming an expert overnight.
Right.
It's about building a solid foundation.
Gotcha. So not feeling too pressured yet, are you?
No pressure at all.
Okay, good. I like how they're framing this as achievable progress. It's not about being perfect right away. It's about making steady improvement. But I'm curious, do they talk about spreading yourself too thin? Like, what if I want to learn, say, French and coding at the same time? Would they be cool with that?
They're pretty adamant about this, actually.
Okay.
Focus is key, they say. They argue that you'll get way better results if you dedicate your energy to one skill at a time, rather than trying to juggle multiple things. In fact, they have a whole slogan for it. One skill, 1 month, one transformation.
Okay, so no multitasking allowed, huh? Which honestly might be a good thing. It's probably hard enough to stick to one new thing, let alone try to juggle several at once. So let's say you've picked that one skill you really want to master. What's the next step?
Well, they're all about breaking down that big, scary goal into smaller, more manageable steps. They use coding as an example. Like, start with the basics, variables, loops, stuff like that. Then gradually work your way up to building a simple program.
Right, so even if you're not a tech whiz, the main takeaway here is to chunk it down, right?
Exactly.
Like if you're learning to paint, maybe you start with color theory before you even think about tackling a full-blown portrait.
Exactly. It not only makes the whole thing less intimidating, but it also gives you that sense of achievement as you check those smaller steps off your list. And that, they say, ties back to the noticeable growth we were talking about earlier.
Makes sense.
Seeing that progress can really keep you going.
It's like those level up moments in a video game.
Oh.
All right, so we've chosen our skill. We've broken it down into bite-sized pieces. What's next?
This is where it gets real daily practice.
Okay.
They are big on this. They say it's like the magic ingredient.
Yeah, but let's be honest. Finding time every single day, that could be tough, right?
They get that. They totally do. But they argue consistency is super important. Even on crazy busy days, try to squeeze in at least 10 or 15 minutes. And they actually suggest a technique called habit stacking, which I gotta say, sounds pretty interesting.
Habit stacking, what is that?
Yeah.
I'm all ears, especially if it can help me actually stick to a routine,
So they say it's all about connecting your new habit, in this case, practicing your skill,
Okay.
to an existing one. So let's say you always have coffee first thing in the morning. Well, right after that coffee, boom, 10 minutes of coding practice.
So you're basically using an existing habit as a trigger for the new one. That's actually pretty clever.
Right.
I wonder, do they give any examples of specific habits that work well for this? Like, what kind of habits should we be stacking?
They don't really go into that level of detail, but they do say that the key is to pick a habit that's already super ingrained in your routine, something you do almost automatically without thinking about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got our skill picked out. We've broken it down. We've got our habit stacking strategy ready to roll. What comes next? Do they talk about, like, the actual learning resources?
Oh, they definitely do. They're all about those online resources. Free Code Camp, Duolingo, Skillshare, you name it. They're like, there's literally a resource out there for every skill you could possibly imagine.
Wow, that's both super exciting and a little overwhelming, right? Like, how are you supposed to choose? I can already picture myself spiraling down a rabbit hole of options. Does the podcast offer any guidance?
They actually warn about that.
Oh, good.
Getting lost in the sea of options, they call it. Their advice: do your research, pick 1 or 2 reliable resources that resonate with you, and then stick with them. No platform hopping. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's really solid advice, actually. It's easy to get distracted by all the shiny new apps and platforms out there, but focusing on just a couple of good ones is probably a much better strategy in the long run.
Right.
Okay, so focus on your resources. Don't get distracted.
Right.
What else?
Well, they also talk about the importance of getting feedback and tracking your progress throughout those 30 days.
Okay, the feedback part, that makes sense, but isn't that kind of intimidating? Who wants to be constantly judged, while they're still learning? Like, what kind of feedback are we talking about here?
They suggest finding an accountability buddy. It could be a friend, a mentor, someone in an online community.
Okay.
The point is, it's someone who can offer helpful advice, someone who can help you spot areas where you can improve.
So it's more about supportive feedback rather than just
Oh,
criticism.
right.
Someone to cheer you on and point out things you might be missing.
Exactly. And as far as tracking your progress goes, they say any method that works for you is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Journaling, using an app, marking a calendar, whatever helps you visualize how far you've come. Because they say, and I totally agree, seeing that progress can be a huge motivator, especially when you hit those inevitable roadblocks, which, let's be honest, we all do.
That's a good point. Having that visual reminder
Yeah.
could definitely help on those days where you feel like you're not getting anywhere. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about choosing the skill, breaking it down, finding the right resources, getting feedback, tracking progress.
Mm-hmm.
But what about dealing with those moments when you hit a wall and just feel like giving up?
Well, that's a great segue into part 2. They actually have some really interesting ideas about overcoming those challenges and staying motivated throughout the whole 30 days. But we'll save those for next time. Stay tuned.
Sounds good. Can't wait to dive into that. Welcome back. So last time, we're really getting into this whole 30-day mastery thing, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's starting to sound less like some, crazy marketing scheme and more like an actual plan you could follow.
Yeah.
But we kind of left off on a cliffhanger, remember?
Yeah.
Like, how do you deal with those moments when you hit a wall and just feel like giving up? Because let's be real, that happens to everyone, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, they spend a lot of time talking about that, actually. They emphasize the importance of, your mindset. It's not just about the techniques and resources. It's about how you approach the whole challenge mentally.
Okay.
They say it's crucial to see those obstacles as opportunities for growth.
So instead of getting all bummed out when you hit a roadblock, you should see it as a chance to learn something.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
But how do you actually, make that mental shift from feeling like, ugh, I'm terrible at this, to, okay, this is a chance to figure something out?
They suggest thinking back to why you started in the first place. Like, what's your ultimate goal? How will mastering this skill actually benefit you?
Right.
Sometimes reconnecting with that initial motivation can be enough to push through those rough patches.
Yeah, I can see that. So let's say I'm trying to learn coding, right? And I hit a snag and I'm getting frustrated. But then I remember that my goal is to build a website for my photography business, something I've always wanted to do. That renewed sense of purpose, that could totally help me power through.
Absolutely. And they also talk about finding ways to actually make the learning process fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Because let's face it, if you dread those practice sessions, you're way less likely to stick with it.
That's so true. It shouldn't feel like a chore, right?
Yeah.
Do they give any, specific examples of how to make learning more fun?
Well, they suggest tailoring your approach to your interests.
Okay.
So if you're learning a new language, maybe watch movies or listen to music in that language.
Right.
Or if you're learning to code, find a project that genuinely excites you, something
Right.
you actually want to build.
So find ways to, connect it to your passions. I love that. It makes it feel less like, oh, gotta do this, and more like, ooh, this is part of something I already love.
Exactly. And they also emphasize celebrating those little wins along the way. Don't just focus on that end goal. Acknowledge those small victories
Right.
that can really help keep you going.
So even something as simple as, successfully writing a few lines of code or figuring out a new grammar rule, that's worth celebrating.
Totally. Because those small wins, they add up. And they contribute to that overall feeling of progress, which is super important for staying motivated.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, do they talk about what happens when you plateau? When you feel like you're putting in the work but not really making any progress.
Yeah, they actually acknowledge that plateaus are totally normal.
Hmm.
They're a natural part of the learning process.
Right.
And they offer a few strategies for dealing with them.
Okay, I'm all ears. This is something I struggle with all the time.
Well, one thing they suggest is to change up your routine.
Okay.
So if you've been doing the same type of practice every day, try something different.
Right.
Maybe switch up your learning resources or find a new teacher or experiment with a different learning style.
So shake things up a bit. That makes sense. Get a fresh perspective.
Exactly. And they also talk about seeking feedback from others. Like, talk to someone who's already mastered the skill you're trying to learn.
Okay.
Maybe they can spot something you're missing.
Right. Sometimes you need that outside perspective to see those blind spots, you know.
Ah.
Did they talk about taking breaks too? Like, how important is rest?
Yeah, they definitely do. They emphasize the importance of rest and recovery, reminding listeners that pushing yourself too hard can lead to burnout.
Right.
They recommend taking regular breaks, getting enough sleep, and, just doing things that help you relax and recharge.
So it's not about just grinding away for 30 days straight. You got to factor in time for like self-care too.
Exactly. It's about finding a sustainable rhythm, something you can actually stick with in the long run.
Man, this podcast is full of really good advice. I'm starting to feel like I could actually tackle one of these 30-day challenges and come out the other side with a new skill.
That's awesome.
And speaking of skills, they end the episode on a really cool note. They remind listeners that the skills you develop during that 30-day challenge, they actually go way beyond the specific skill you're focusing on.
Right.
What do you mean? Do they elaborate on that?
Yeah, they explain that, the process of mastering any skill, no matter what it is, it cultivates all these valuable meta skills, things like discipline, resilience, problem solving, self-motivation. And those are all skills that you can apply to, any area of your life.
Wow, that's a really good point. So even if I don't become like a fluent French speaker in 30 days, I'll still gain valuable skills that can help me in other areas.
Absolutely. It's like the 30-day challenge becomes less about achieving a specific outcome and more about developing that growth mindset and those tools that can help you tackle any challenge.
I love that. It takes the pressure off of, being perfect and shifts the focus to the journey to learning and growing as a person.
Exactly. And they really emphasize that mastering anything is an ongoing process. It's not about reaching some destination. It's about being on that lifelong journey of learning and discovery.
So the 30 days is just the beginning, huh? It's about getting that momentum going and cultivating a love of learning.
Exactly. It's about embracing the process, enjoying the ride, and continuously challenging yourself to grow and evolve.
Man, this has been such a great deep dive. I'm actually feeling really inspired to pick a skill and give this 30-day challenge a shot. What about you?
I'm definitely feeling motivated too, and I'm super curious to hear what our listeners are thinking. Has this sparked any ideas for you? What skill are you itching to master?
We want to hear all about it. Share your thoughts with us on social media, and stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive where we'll be discussing. Okay, so we're back for the final part of this deep dive into the 30-day mastery idea. And you know what? I'm actually kind of fired up about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. After going through all the tips and strategies from that podcast, it's really starting to feel less like some, quick fix and more like a legit approach to learning new things. It's not just about like cramming info into your brain. It's about shifting your whole mindset, making learning something you actually enjoy and can stick with.
Well, and they save the best for last, Remember how we talked about making learning fun in the last part? Well, they actually dedicate this last section to something they call the joy factor.
The joy factor. Okay. I like the sound of that already. I mean, who doesn't want to enjoy the process, right? But how do they actually suggest finding that joy, especially when you're tackling something kind of tough?
They actually have a bunch of strategies, which is cool. One of them is connecting your learning to something you're already passionate about.
Okay.
They use the example of someone who loves animals and wants to learn photography. Instead of just taking random pictures, they could focus on getting amazing shots of their pets or, wildlife, stuff they actually care about.
I love that example. So it's like finding a way to make your learning fit into something you already love. That way it feels less like work and more like, ooh, this is just an extension of something I already enjoy.
Totally.
Okay.
Another thing they suggest is to gamify the whole process,
Yeah.
Use apps and tools that have game-like elements, points, rewards, challenges, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I'm all about that.
Right.
I mean, those little rewards, they really work. Even if they're virtual, it's like that feeling of leveling up in a video game,
Mm.
but for real life.
Exactly. And then they also talk about the importance of community,
Yeah.
finding people who share your interests.
Right.
Whether it's an online forum or a local class or just a group of friends who are also learning the same thing, they say that support system can make a huge difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's way more fun to share the journey with others, celebrate wins together, even like commiserate over the tough parts. Makes the whole thing less lonely.
Totally. And then they kind of wrap things up with this really powerful message about, focusing on the journey, not just the destination, reminding us that mastering anything is an ongoing process and that it's okay to make mistakes along the way.
Which we all do. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in the idea of being perfect,
Mm.
and then we forget that mistakes are like part of how we learn.
For sure. And they actually talk about mistakes as being valuable feedback.
Okay.
They encourage listeners to see setbacks as opportunities to learn, to adjust their approach, and to, come back even stronger.
That's a great way to look at it. It takes so much pressure off. It lets you experiment and try things
Yeah.
without being afraid to mess up.
Right. And then they basically end with this call to action, encouraging listeners to take that first step, choose a skill that gets them excited, and just dive into that 30-day challenge with enthusiasm and a sense of adventure.
Man, I gotta say, I am feeling so inspired right now. Like, this deep dive has totally changed how I think about learning. It's not about, cramming a bunch of stuff into my brain or achieving some arbitrary level of mastery. It's about cultivating that growth mindset, finding the joy in the process, and embracing the fact that learning is a lifelong adventure.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, what's one thing you're going to do today to make learning more fun? We want to hear all about it. Share your thoughts with us on social media, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep that joy factor high.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey of knowledge and inspiration. We'll see you next time.